You are 38. Your net worth just crossed $1.9 million. Nobody who knows you would guess it. Same rental apartment, same secondhand sedan, same brown paper lunch bag sitting on the break room counter like it belongs to someone still figuring things out. You are not still figuring things out. You figured it out 11 years ago, on a night you have never told anyone about, and it started with a number that should have terrified you. You were sitting in your car in a grocery store parking lot, engine off, heater fading, doing math on the back of a crumpled receipt. You didn't trust yourself to remember the numbers once you walked inside. The number came back wrong. Not dramatically wrong, quietly wrong. The kind of wrong that doesn't announce itself. It just sits in your chest like a stone you swallowed and can't cough up. You were working 48 hours a week, saying yes to every overtime shift, skipping every weekend trip, and at the end of every 30 days your checking account hovered at the exact same fragile number, $94. You remember exactly what that parking lot smelled like. Cold air, exhaust, the faint burnt smell drifting over from the diner 2 doors down. You remember thinking that if anyone walked past your car right then, they'd have no idea a grown adult was quietly panicking over a gas station receipt. That's the part that stuck with you the longest, how invisible the whole moment was. No one witnessed the worst financial night of your life. 11 years later, no one would witness the best one either. That night didn't hand you a windfall or a brilliant idea. It handed you one question, small enough to fit on the back of that receipt. Where does the money actually go? You thought about 2 people you used to work with, because they were the closest thing you had to an answer. Marissa managed operations at a mid-sized logistics company. She made $118,000 a year. In your circle, she was the success story, the one people pointed to when they talked about making it. She drove a pristine SUV, upgraded the year before because the lease was up. Her rent was $2,300 a month for a luxury building with a gym she visited twice a year. She carried 4 store credit cards, 3 of them with balances she paid the minimum on, and $6,000 in savings she dipped into whenever something came up. Something always came up. When her division got restructured and her role was eliminated, she had exactly 11 weeks before her entire life started collapsing under its own weight. Then there was Terrence. Terrence drove a delivery route for a beverage distributor. He made $46,000 a year. If you'd asked anyone in the office who was financially secure, nobody would have picked him. His truck was 9 years old, paid off, missing a hubcap. He rented a 2-bedroom apartment for $980 a month and split it with a roommate. He packed his lunch every day, not out of extreme self-denial. Buying food on the road had just stopped being a habit. And every payday, without him lifting a finger, $650 moved automatically into an investment account he almost never logged into. 7 years of that had turned into over $70,000, plus an emergency fund sitting untouched in high-yield savings. Marissa earned more than double what Terrence earned. Terrence was fundamentally wealthier. Not because he was luckier, not because he had some secret genius. Terrence had grasped the thing you were only beginning to suspect in that parking lot. What you earn and what you keep are 2 completely separate stories, and most people ruin their lives confusing one for the other. Picture 2 roofs in the same storm. Marissa's roof is enormous, brand new, built to impress everyone on the block. But underneath, there are dozens of small structural gaps from years of neglect. When the rain comes hard, it pours straight through, and by morning the roof still looks fine from the street, while the frame underneath is soaked and rotting. Terrence's roof is smaller, weathered, unpretentious, and it has 0 leaks. Every drop that lands on it gets caught, redirected, funneled into a barrel he built himself. It doesn't matter how much rain falls on a roof full of holes, you cannot out-earn a leak. So ask yourself, honestly right now, which roof is yours? Mainstream advice tells you to focus entirely on the weather. Work harder, get another degree, ask for a raise, pick up a 3rd gig. It treats the size of the roof as the only variable that matters. But the roof was never your problem. The holes were. You had looked for your own leaks before that night. You'd opened your banking app, scrolled the endless timeline of $14 charges, felt the sinking feeling, and promised yourself you'd tighten up next month. You did, for about 12 days. Then life got busy, willpower ran out, and the balance at the end of the next month looked exactly like the one before it. Seeing the leak didn't fix the leak. Awareness was never the missing piece. The missing piece was friction, or more precisely, the deliberate removal of it by everyone trying to sell you something. Think about how easy spending has become. One tap at a coffee counter, one swipe on a screen, and a box shows up on your porch 2 days later. An app open at 10 at night because your brain is tired and wants a quick hit of relief. Your card is saved everywhere. The entire transaction takes 4 seconds and asks nothing of you emotionally. That ease isn't an accident. Billions of dollars get spent by engineers and behavioral psychologists with one job: shrink the distance between wanting something and paying for it down to zero. So you decided to put the friction back yourself. You started writing down every dollar you spent, by hand, in ink, before bed. It sounds almost embarrassingly plain, but writing $6.20 for late-night coffee forces your brain to register the loss in a way tapping a card never does. Within 2 weeks, you had it sorted into 4 categories: essentials, rent, groceries, insurance, the non-negotiables, growth, books, courses, anything that made future you more capable, emergencies, the unavoidable hits, and optional, delivery fees, impulse buys, subscriptions you'd forgotten you were paying for. That 4th category is where the whole game gets decided. Not because enjoying your life is wrong, but because optional spending is invisible until you force it onto paper. Once you saw it, you gave yourself one rule: the 30-day delay. Any non-essential impulse got written on a list with the date next to it, and you walked away for 30 days. When the time was up, you reviewed the list. 9 times out of 10, the want had evaporated completely. You realized you never actually wanted the thing. You wanted a break from stress, or a long day, or boredom. 30 days later, the feeling was gone, and the money was still yours. You'll admit it wasn't clean. 6 months in, a coworker got a promotion you'd been quietly hoping for, and that night, sitting in your car in the same parking lot, you almost bought a watch you didn't need. $340. Nothing extravagant, just enough to feel like you'd won something back. Your thumb hovered over the checkout button for a full minute. You could feel the old version of yourself reaching for the fast relief, the same reach that used to empty your account by the 30th of every month. Instead, you closed the app, wrote the watch and the date on the list, and went to bed feeling nothing had been resolved. 30 days later, you opened the list and read, "Watch, $340, like it belonged to a stranger." You didn't even remember the coworker's promotion. That was the first time the system actually worked on you, not just for you. Proof that the version of yourself who wanted relief at 10 at night wasn't the version who got to make the decision anymore. Slowing the leak protected what you had, but it was still passive. It showed you where the water was going. It didn't build you a reservoir. For that, you had to change the order money moved through your life. Most people budget backwards. Paycheck lands, rent gets paid, credit cards get paid, groceries get bought, dinner gets ordered, and whatever survives at the end of the month is supposed to become savings. Nothing ever survives. You flipped it. The day your paycheck landed, you didn't pay the landlord first. You paid yourself first, before you saw a single dollar of it. You opened an account at a bank with no branch on your commute, no debit card in your wallet, no easy instant transfer button. You made your own money slightly annoying to reach, on purpose. Your take-home was $3,200 a month. You automatically diverted $400 of it, about 12%, before it ever touched your checking account. You trained yourself to live on $2,800, because the other $400 had already left the building. Then you layered a rule on top: 60% to essentials, 25% minimum into long-term investing and reserves, 15% for whatever you actually wanted. The $2,800 felt tight for the first few months. It was supposed to. That tightness made you actually think before every optional purchase instead of drifting into it. Here's the part that still surprises people when you explain it. Someone earning $48,000 a year who automatically locks in 25% before spending a cent will outbuild someone earning $140,000 who tries to save whatever's left over. High earners get comfortable. Their spending rises right alongside their raises, and the gap between what they earn and what they keep stays dangerously thin. The real secret was never the size of the income. It was the size of the gap, and whether you protected it. Once that gap existed, letting it sit in a regular checking account created a new, quieter problem. Inflation running at 3.5% against a bank account paying you 1/100% means your money is guaranteed to lose value the longer it sits still. So your money needed somewhere to actually work. You didn't need stock tips or speculative trades. The finance industry survives by making investing sound complicated enough that you'll pay someone to do it for you. What you actually needed was a broad market index fund, one basket holding small pieces of hundreds of the largest, most profitable companies in the country. As the economy grows, your slice grows with it. The real engine underneath all of it is compound interest, and its most important ingredient isn't the size of your first deposit. It's time. $500 a month into that fund, growing at roughly 9% a year, close to the market's long-run historical average, turns into something like $96,000 after 10 years, on $60,000 of your own contributions. Keep going for 20 years and you've put in 120,000, but compounding has added over 200,000 more, putting you near 330,000. 30 years in, your $180,000 of contributions has grown into something over 900,000. The first few years of that graph look almost flat. You put money in, month after month, and the number barely moves. It felt unimpressive, and more than once you almost stopped. That flat stretch is exactly where most people quit. They invest for a year and a half, check the balance, see nothing dramatic, and decide it isn't working. What they're missing is that compounding does its heaviest lifting at the very end. The growth in year 20 dwarfs the growth in year 3. The silence of the early years wasn't failure, it was the groundwork. You knew a single paycheck funding all of this was still fragile. One layoff, one industry shift, one bad month of health, and you'd be forced to stop the transfers or, worse, sell the investments early just to cover rent, which erases years of compounding in one afternoon. You'd watched it happen to Marissa in slow motion, and you had no intention of repeating it. So you built layers instead of one column. The first layer was still your job. It funded your baseline living costs, but you stopped treating it as your entire financial survival plan. The second layer was your investments themselves. As the index fund grew, it started throwing off its own returns, and instead of spending those, you let them reinvest automatically, buying more of the fund without you lifting a finger. The third layer was smaller and slower to build, a bit of freelance work on weekends, a high-yield reserve sitting completely separate from your core investments, built specifically to absorb the unexpected costs life throws at you, before they ever touch the money that's supposed to be compounding untouched for decades. None of these three layers needed to be dramatic on their own. What mattered was that they didn't rely on each other. When your car needed an $1,100 transmission repair 2 years in, you didn't blink, didn't touch the index fund, and didn't miss a single automatic transfer that month. The third layer simply absorbed it and moved on. When one stream took a hit, the other two carried the weight, and the compounding never had to stop to catch its breath. As the balance quietly crossed 100,000, then 500,000, something else showed up that nobody warns you about, the urge to prove it. A newer car, a bigger apartment, something visible enough that coworkers would notice you'd moved up. You felt that pull more than once, and you recognized exactly what it was, the same instinct that had Marissa driving a lease she couldn't actually afford. You resisted it because you understood the actual cost. The moment your life looks more expensive, it requires more money just to keep looking that way, and that overhead eats directly into the gap you spent years protecting. So you kept driving the same reliable, paid-off car. You stayed in the same reasonably priced apartment. You let people assume you were doing just okay, and you felt no need to correct them. This was never about deprivation. It was about knowing the difference between looking rich and being free. Looking rich takes constant spending and constant performance. Being free takes capital, low overhead, and control over your own time. And only one of those actually holds up when the economy turns. You heard, years later, that Marissa never fully recovered from the layoff. She took a lower-paying job just to cover the SUV payment and a lease she couldn't quietly downsize out of, and last anyone heard, she was still working well past the age she used to say she'd retire. Terrence, last you checked, had walked away from the delivery route entirely at 44, living off the very account nobody at his old job ever knew existed, still driving the same 9-year-old truck out of habit more than necessity. You think about that sometimes, how the two of them looked, back when you all worked together, and how completely backwards it turned out to be. The one everyone envied ended up trapped by the very things that made her look successful. The one nobody noticed ended up free before he turned 50. Nobody at your dinner table knows your real numbers. Nobody passing you on the street suspects a thing. But the brokerage account knows, and most mornings, while an automatic transfer runs quietly in the background and you're just pouring your coffee, that silence is the whole victory. There was no lottery win, no risky bet that paid off, no dramatic cinematic turn, just a transfer that ran on schedule while you worked, a 30-day rule that talked you out of the watch, and everything like it. An index fund that kept compounding while you slept, year after year, long after you stopped checking it every week. Small, unglamorous decisions, stacked one on top of the other, moving slowly at first and then faster than you thought possible, until one day they added up to something unshakable. So the only question left is the one you have to ask yourself tonight. What is another 12 months of the old pattern actually costing you?